Chamber of Commerce and Community Medical Center to our talk on suicide awareness and prevention. I'm Rebecca Morley with the Missoula City County Health Department, and I happen to sit on the Chamber of Commerce Health Committee. And I want to introduce this absolutely outstanding, phenomenal panel from many different aspects that will deal with our community as they're facing situations where they need to be aware of suicide, and all of us can help in the prevention efforts. So first of all, we have Jace, and he's the Chief Deputy Coroner with the Missoula Sheriff's Office. Next, we have Kim Seeberger. She's a QPR trainer, and she is also a mother who has suffered loss. Next, we have Mike Frost, and he's a LLPC, LAC Director of Counseling Services from the University of Montana. Then we've got Jack Shifflett from NAMI. And Dr. Blair Davison is going to go next, and she's with Providence St. Patrick Psychiatry. And last of all, we have Susan Haypatrick, who is the Montana Chair of Project Tomorrow and also CEO of United Way Missoula. So thank you so much for being here tonight. Jace, we'll turn it to you.
Good evening. Thanks for having us here. This is kind of an uncharted water for me. I'm not going to touch the microphone because I'm kind of a loudmouth and I'm afraid that it might hurt your ears. As stated before, I'm the Chief Deputy Coroner with Missoula County. The Sheriff is actually the coroner. He's got 13 deputy coroners. I oversee those guys' work. I do the follow-on investigations. The short answer is your Sheriff's Office and your deputies are on the cutting edge, as are your Missoula Police Department whenever there is an actual suicide. And we do the investigations. Coroners focus on death investigation. And at the end of the day, I just want to put a plug in for our sheriff because we're pretty blessed right now and that he wants our agency to be proactive in community policing and reaching out and giving us the ability to come and step up prevention efforts, allowing us to come and speak. I'm a cop first. I'm going to try not to cuss tonight. If I do, it's not to offend anybody. It's just old habits die hard. It's that fat-headed Irish thing. Montana's had the highest suicide rate in the nation for years and years and years, and it's not changing, and it's not going away. And it encourages me to see this panel and these experts and a community starting to take notice and sit up and try to do something, especially in the area of prevention, because we have to believe that suicide is preventable. We have to hold on to that nugget of hope. And I'll just tell you, my career path, that's a hard thing to do sometimes because it's dark and it's heavy. And I make a living shattering people's worlds. And I have the unfortunate pleasure, the duty of providing people with the truth and trying to arm them to make sense out of something that's not normal. So our sheriff being proactive has allowed us and our chaplaincy to move forward and try to get on the front half of this. Get ourselves out there, get our faces out there in the public, in the schools. We just started with the school resource officer this year in the county schools. She's rotating around. We've done a few assemblies. We're trying to work with young people in particular because it's especially tragic when young teenage kids complete the act of suicide. So with that, I want to show you a video that we put together. Just watch it. It's one of the things that we're trying to reach young people with and get on their level. This was like 3 of my 8 minutes. All right.
I'm sorry.
We'll skip the video. In essence, this is a video of us going to a school to notify principal. And there's radio traffic that gets the tones going off, which is what I hear in my car when something bad has happened. And it asks us to respond to a 14-year-old male who shot himself in the head, which is not uncommon. And it just kind of goes through the progression, and it reaches out to what's happening with our young people in regard to social media. And we've never had more knowledge, we've never had more access to the world at our fingertips through our internet, our electronic devices. But with that, there comes this loss of that human element. There comes a breakdown in understanding relationships and being able to relate to people realistically. There's a certain amount of anonymity with being able to just shoot texts and voice your First Amendment rights at will without sometimes accountability. And there's a lot of anti-bullying, there's a lot of mental health issues. This is all one big onion that has several layers, and we want to just work on the different layers as we can. But with young people especially, the essence is this guy misses a pass, and then the kids at the school start railing on him. The good news is I put the stats together for this year in Missoula County. To date, as of today, we've had 27 suicides in Missoula County. Fortunately, this year, we've only had one teenager. Across the spectrum of age groups, mostly it's males. We've had 23 males, 4 females. The primary cause is firearms. Unfortunately, with our culture and our hunting and the access that we have to firearms, and a lot of folks believe that's our heritage, they're readily available and not always taken care of in a proper manner. That's the primary cause. There's been a few unique suicides for us investigatively, whether one was a blunt force trauma to a train, one was a carbon monoxide poisoning. There's always one that is a little bit strange to investigate, and it really makes you wonder what the mental state is of that person and what brought them to that point to come be that creative. And unfortunately, in my job and career as an investigator, to make sure it's not a homicide, I get to watch the video of the train as the young lady, 22 years old, with her headphones, is at a place of darkness and oppression that she walks right into it and doesn't get out of the way. That's not a fun story. That's not popular. Because the reality of it is, it's not a reality TV show. This is real. This is our community. These are our young people. And we, as leaders in the community, need to be responsible, and we need to be able to step up to the plate, number one, start the conversation, which I think is great. I think that's starting to happen. But we also need to rely on each other. I bring one small portion to the table, and we could probably all speak for the whole hour tonight in our area of expertise. I just encourage you to listen tonight. We don't always get along. I have a saying that I use in my profession a lot, and it's like, look, eat the meat and spit out the bones. Okay? If we can glean and take anything out of here that's positive, that's going to help us or help our family members or help our coworkers, or let's look for that tonight. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kim Seeberger, and I'm here representing as a parent who has lost a child to suicide, and also as somebody who is out in the community doing suicide prevention training. In 2008, my family lost our 17-year-old daughter, Tiffany, to suicide. I can't describe to you the impact that that had and still has on our family. It's not something that goes away, that gets better with time, that you heal from. Hopefully, though, you learn coping skills that will help you deal with the ups and downs that you're going to have for the rest of your life. Everybody who has been touched by suicide handles it in a different way. I grieve differently than my husband grieved, than my son grieved, than the rest of the family. And there's so many variables and emotions that come into play when somebody dies by suicide. You've got shock and disbelief, hurt, anger, a lot of questions, many more emotions. And many times people that have been the survivors, as they call them, the people that are left behind, they feel that they're out there alone, that nobody understands what they're going through and that. And at times they too sometimes feel that people start treating them differently. And where that can come from is that people are afraid to talk about suicide, and that's a stigma that we have to break. And they don't know, they don't understand why the person completed suicide, and they don't know what to say to the family that's left behind. And I learned personally in specifically the first year of it, that I learned patience for others, patience for myself, and a lot of forgiving. Because people really want to be there for you. They want to help in that, but they don't always know how to do that and what to say. A lot of times what they say comes across as they're telling you how you should react, what you should do, and that just because they don't know what else to say to you. I had a couple of examples of that. Was when my daughter passed, I didn't go to work for probably a good month. And during that time, I had a person come up to me and ask me if I was back to work yet. And I said, no, I'm not back yet. I just am not ready. And the response that they gave me was, well, you should go back to work. It'll be good for you. It'll help you through the process. Then, after I got back to work, I had another person outside of the working environment ask if I was back to work. And I said, yes, I'm back. And they went, oh, really? And then I started feeling like, gosh, am I wrong being back at work? I just had so many mixed feelings going back and forth. Another thing that occurred was my husband and I frequented our daughter's gravesite, and pretty much on a daily basis. Part of the reason for that was my husband worked just down the road from the cemetery that she's at, and we carpool. So it was pretty much a daily thing. And somebody commented to us that they felt that it was really unhealthy that we were going there so often. And I know they were saying it in kindness and just trying to be helpful in that. But I learned that you have to do what you feel is right in your heart and what's going to help you through the process and deal with the things that you're having to deal with. There are some things that people can do if you happen to know a family that has gone through a suicide. Don't be afraid to approach them. And sometimes we get that feeling, the survivors, that people are afraid to come up to you. They don't know what to say. But what you can do is you can offer them, how can I support you? What can I do to help you through this? Don't be careful that you aren't judgmental in what you say. Expect tears. I never cried before. And boy, for a long period of there, people just have to look at me differently, and the tears would flow and stuff, and that's just all part of it. Understand that it may be difficult for the people to focus and make decisions. I couldn't even make an appointment for a luncheon date a week in advance. It was too much to ask of me right away. And also understand that grieving doesn't stop in a month or 6 months or a year. Other people go on with their life after the funeral is done, but the family is still dealing with things for a long, long time. And just, maybe check in with the person every so often and just see how they're doing. Due to my family's situation and in memory of my daughter, I wanted to do something that would prevent another person from losing their life to suicide and to prevent families from going through the devastation that is the after effect of it. And it was about 4 years after her death that I had an opportunity to get training as a certified instructor for QPR for suicide prevention. QPR stands for Question, Persuade, and Refer. I didn't know what I was going to do with that training. I did not know if I would be able to get up in front of people and talk about suicide without losing my composure. So what I did was I went back to my staff at work and I took them in little groups and I started practicing with them, and they were so supportive of me. And I'm on my 5th year of training throughout the county and other places too. QPR is something that anybody can use. You don't have to be in the medical field. You don't have to be a doctor, psychologist, psychiatrist, counselor. Anybody can use suicide to help prevent suicide. And my goal is to help break the stigma. It's a huge stigma out there surrounding suicide, and to educate our community and train as many people as possible in learning what the warning signs and clues are of suicide and how they can intervene and possibly help prevent somebody from taking their own life. This past year, between myself and the other QPR instructors, Jack is one of them that I do a number of QPRs. We always like to try to do it in pairs. We've trained over 2,000 people from hospitals, medical offices, to churches, to the faculties at all the high schools and grade schools and middle schools in School District 1. And we even got a phone call to do the sorority and fraternities at the university. We had over 300 people attending that. They were marvelous. Not one kid was out there on their phone texting or doing stuff. They were all very attentive. And many more organizations. Sometimes I even go outside the county to do training because there are a number of counties that don't have the resources and they can't get people to come in and train. And so if it's something that I can do, I'll take a day of vacation and I'll go do the training for them, because to me it's worth, if it helps one person, it's worth doing. I am also involved with United Way's Project Tomorrow Suicide Prevention Leadership Group, and I'm currently training right now through the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention for the Survivor Outreach Program. And what that is it provides short-term peer support and practical information to newly bereaved suicide loss survivors by pairing them with trained volunteers who have also experienced a suicide loss. It's not something where people are just going to show up on their door saying, here, we're here to talk to you. You have to be invited in by that family that they want somebody to talk to. When my daughter died, I tried immediately to try to get some education going out to the community, and the doors were slammed on me. Nobody wanted to talk about it. They wanted to sweep it under the rug. Their life went on, and it was like they just wanted to forget about the situation. And during especially the past 3 years, I have seen so many doors open up. We are getting more and more requests all the time for training in suicide prevention. And you know, we're making headway on it, and we're making impacts, but we still have a really long ways to go. And really appreciate you guys putting this together and coming here.
And I'm Mike Frost. I'm a counselor over at the University of Montana and the director of the counseling service at Curry Health Center. And so the perspective I just wanted to share here in my introductory comments are from that counseling perspective, as well as being a director of a clinic that is meant to be able to assist folks who are experiencing severe distress where they are having thoughts of taking their own life. So with that, I just, one is a story that I just learned about on Friday, and the other is just about silos, and then I'll be done here. So I went to this retirement party, and it was over at the health center, and one of the docs, a colleague of mine, you know, has a nice little child, probably 3 years old, I suppose, 2 or 3. And so I'm asking, how are things going with the child? And he says, well, we're doing sleep training. And I'm sharing this story, by the way, just because the very first comments about how resistant this to change the culture in our country, in our state, around suicide is so ingrained, it's so hard. I was thinking, why is it that way? So back to the story about sleep training. So he says, well, we go in there at nighttime. Their son had been sleeping in the bed with them, and you know, and it kind of disturbs them throughout the night. And they're trying to get him in his own room, and so they do as the sleep training is that you put him in the room, and then you kind of leave him in there, and then of course the child starts to fuss, and you're supposed to leave him alone for a little while, and then they, you know, I don't know if any of you have ever done this before, but they begin to scream, and you really think that perhaps something bad has just happened. Perhaps they are dying. It's so loud, right? And so we go in there, you know, and it's like, Austin, everything's okay. You're safe. Everything's okay. And then they leave, you know, and then revs up again, and you go in there and you say, Austin, everything, you're all right. And, third time going back in, and, they're getting exhausted. They're sweating on their armpits. They're not going to go to bed themselves. And they go back and it's like, oh, what can we do? Are you okay? And he says, I need a bandage. You need a bandage? Yeah, a bandage would help. So they go out and get a bandage. Where do you want the bandage? Well, put it right here. So they put the bandage on, leave, and the child is able to calm down. And it's like, what in the world? Why is that? Why in the child is distressed, probably feeling frightened, not being with mom and dad, not comforted, not able to relax. And isn't it interesting that we can teach our children from a very young age that the solution to distress is some kind of a physical mechanism, is through medicine. We see that. Instead of through some other ways, which they were teaching them as well. It's like Austin, some reassurance, connectivity with the parents, which is what sleep training is about, is that to be able to soothe and comfort yourself so you can relax well enough to fall asleep and have a routine to do that. So it's like, well, what does that have to do with silos then? Because again, as here in Missoula and on campus at the Curry Health Center, we have systems of care. And our systems of care, when I was trained as a counselor, it was to work with one individual at a time with specific kinds of therapy. We just had to get the people in there to talk to us. And a lot of people didn't want to come talk to us. The stigma, right? It was shameful. They wanted a bandage. They wanted something that worked for them and covered and made it better. And it's really hard to come in and talk and to face the difficulties, the distress, and to learn from that and make adjustments. It takes a lot of courage, and it's really hard. So that's how I was trained. And so I'm working with our medical providers. And the way they were trained, they have a medical model. And the medical model is that you come on in, we ask you some questions, we'll get a history, we'll diagnose you, and we'll give you a prescription about what to do. And there are very different ways of engaging people. So we're trying to work and collaborate with each other, and we keep running into each other's cultures. They're kind of counter cultures almost, because we haven't learned how to really work well together. We weren't trained to work well together. So what's it have to do with anything? So this last year, stats, right? University of Montana, Curry Health Center, counseling service served about 1,500 students. About 25 to 30% of them had thoughts of suicide when they came in, or a history of thoughts of suicide. So it is a common discussion that we have. Our medical clinic, I kind of have a hard time finding our stats for that, but we take a look at how many people went in there for mental health reasons. Well, it's about 1,100 to 1,200. I bet there's probably more. They just didn't diagnose it. But I bet there's a lot more. And so we're saying, well, is there a way that we could work and collaborate more and better to serve all of those people? And how can we get them in the door? Because the prescription for prevention of suicide is the same for all of us. It's to listen, to get people in the door where listening can happen on a level where the distress can be understood, problems can be solved, or at least a direction out of those problems, where people can get connected, and there can be a safe way to maneuver through the difficulties that they're experiencing, whatever that distress might be. Not an easy task. Again, I can't even tell you how difficult it is to try to get these two systems in our health center. We're in the same building. We see each other all the time, but it's just not so easy because our training's so different, how we see things so different, and our routines are so different. But that is suicide prevention. And what we need to do as a society, and it's happening, again, all around Missoula, here at Community Hospital as well, is just embedding behavioral health care folks into these primary care settings and meeting people where they're at and making those conversations happen readily and easily. So, thank you very much.
One of the, usually when I'm on a panel, I like to speak first because one of the problems of listening to the others is I get so caught up in what they're saying, and I'm processing everything that I've heard. And really, I kind of want to just start talking to you guys, but I will address the audience. I'm Jack Shifflett. I'm with NAMI Missoula. I'm the programs coordinator for NAMI Missoula. And for those of you who don't know, NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And so we are the local affiliate of a nationwide organization that provides support, education, and advocacy for individuals living with mental illness and also for their friends and their families. In addition to the work that I do for NAMI Missoula, I am also, as Kim mentioned, a QPR trained instructor, suicide prevention, and Kim and I have done several presentations together, and I have to tell you, it's always a privilege to work with Kim. It's just incredible to do presentations with her. I'm also a volunteer for Project Tomorrow, which has been mentioned, coordinating suicide prevention and awareness efforts here in Missoula, and I'm proud to be part of that as well. The reason why I am so involved in all of those, beginning with the National Alliance on Mental Illness, I have a lifelong history of mental illness, primarily depression. It goes back to my teenage years. I have had probably 24 psychiatric hospitalizations over the course of the years, and most of those, not all of them, but most of those came about as a result of suicide attempts and certainly suicidal ideation. I am what in the suicidology lingo these days, I am a serial attempter of suicide. And in presentations like this, I introduce myself that way, not because I'm trying to establish credentials. I am not claiming to be an expert. I am not an expert on anything except my own experiences. But I do tell people that because I want to make two things clear. One, I am maybe the luckiest human being on the face of the earth, just lucky to be alive here, lucky to be living in Missoula, Montana. And trust me, there's not a day goes by that I don't think how lucky I am to still be alive, and that I do not think back with gratitude on the many, many people who kept me alive against my will, against my wishes, when I wanted to be gone, and they said, nope, we're not letting you go. And so part of, again, as part of the QPR presentations that Kim and I do, the suicide prevention, I tell people, you hold on to somebody. If you know they're at risk, you hold on. They may not thank you then. They may never thank you. But there will come a time when they'll think about you and they'll remember. They may not remember your name. They just know, oh yeah, that was that person who got me help that time I needed help. So you know, my experience tells me that. I'm extraordinarily lucky to be alive. And it also tells me that panels like this and programs like the QPR suicide prevention and groups like Project Tomorrow, these are just absolutely necessary. We have got to make this a community conversation. We have got to make this a community issue. People who are on the brink of suicide, excuse me, people who are in such despair and depression and emotional pain, they need others, again, to hold on to them and to keep them going. But the people who do that, the people who help somebody stay alive, they need help too. This isn't one person, this isn't two person, this ultimately is a community of helpers, and we've got to be there for each other. We've heard some statistics, and as Kim knows, I always emphasize to audiences that, to me, there are two essential statistics that people need to be aware of when it comes to suicide and suicide prevention. Two numbers that often get overlooked. The first number is the number 0, because 0 is the only acceptable number of suicides, and it just breaks my heart that we've had 27 in Missoula County.
Can you clarify that? I got sidetracked.
That's 27 suicides. That does not take into account the 12 accidental drug overdoses.
Right.
So there's a separate stigma and a separate stat for that category. Ultimately, those folks ended their life, but it's classified as an accident, and that ties in very well with the mental health issues and the mental health crisis that's prevalent really across our land right now.
Yeah.
But so the number's actually higher. It's a matter of schematics and how we figure that in, unfortunately.
Well, If the number is higher than 0, it's unacceptable.
Exactly.
The other number that I emphasize is the number 1. And the reason that I point that out is to remind folks that if you get involved, either you take a QPR suicide prevention training and you learn this technique for intervening in a crisis, or if you just happen to do it, you haven't been trained, but you're a decent human being, and you see somebody in pain and in trouble and you reach out to help them. In that moment, the person that you're dealing with is not a statistic. They are one human being, and it is a one-to-one relationship where you become their lifeline for as long as you can do that, and they are the most important person in your world for the time during which you're working with them. It has to be, and so to put that kind of effort and that kind of focus, we've got to be working together, because it's too hard for individuals to do this. I got a call from someone today at the NAMI Missoula office, and it was not a call from a suicidal person. It was a call from a landlord who had a tenant that had told him the tenant was suicidal. And so this landlord was calling us at NAMI Missoula, had tried to call a couple other places, I think, and had gotten answering machines. And to be perfectly honest, had gotten my voicemail, but I happened to walk into the office right at the point where this person was leaving a message, and I heard the word suicidal, and I was like, okay, I'm picking this one up. So I talked to this landlord, and you know, I won't go into details, but the point is he told me how he had responded to his tenant when he heard that the tenant was suicidal. And it's like, this guy must be the best landlord in Missoula. He must be the best landlord in the world, perhaps. But he did all the right things. He talked to him. He listened to him. He got a promise from him to keep going to a certain point anyway. He got a handshake pledge on that. And then, having gotten that from the tenant, he then set about trying to find out other lifelines for this tenant, calling places and finally calling NAMI Missoula. And so now it's my job to get in touch with the tenant who is suicidal and pick it up from there and see if we can get him some help. But this is about community. It's got to be about community. And again, the lesson from that is that you do not have to be a trained mental health professional. You don't have to have taken a QPR or any other formal suicide prevention. You have to pay attention, you have to care, you have to respond to those signs and signals. And in this case, where somebody flat out says, I'm thinking about killing myself, you have got to have the guts to not run away from that. And that takes a lot, believe me. Because I've gotten calls in the NAMI office from people who are themselves suicidal, and there's times that I'm wishing I had not answered that phone. It's just really hard to deal with that. There's pain and there's obviously danger, and you're thinking, what a responsibility, what if I don't handle this right? But I think as Mike just said, listening is the key, to let people express their pain, to let them be open about, I'm thinking of killing myself, I hate my life. We can't be afraid of hearing that. It's powerful, it's painful, but we cannot be afraid of it, because if we are, then the person's not going to open up to us. In the QPR trainings that Kim and I do, there's a quotation at some point, and I can't remember who it's from for sure. It might be from K. Redfield Jameson, but it's a quotation that says, "No great misery goes unspoken." And what I believe about suicide, and based primarily, I guess, on my own experience, is that suicide attempts are attempts to end the pain, they are attempts to end the life, to get out of this world that has become too much, but they are also an attempt to communicate. And by that, I don't mean that suicide attempts are a cry for help. I used to hear that all the time. People would say, oh, you were just asking for help. No, I was trying to die. But still, there is a sense in which a suicide attempt or a completed suicide, it's the only way the person at that point can communicate. I never left notes. I never left suicide notes. If I could have put what I was feeling into words, I wouldn't have had to act it out. My suicide attempts were my suicide notes. There are other people who do leave notes, and I'm telling you that when they leave the note, the suicide attempt is the punctuation to that note. It is part of a communication This person knows no other way to be heard, no other way to express the gravity, the depth of what they're feeling than to do this thing. So understand that people are desperately trying to communicate. They may not have the words. So pick up on the signals, pick up on the clues, encourage them to talk. Listen. Sometimes you have to listen to the silence too. And I know when people would confront me about my suicidal ideation, often what they got back was a long silence until finally I would say, yes, I am thinking about killing myself. So we need to listen, even to the silence, and we need to hear the pain, even when they can't put it in words, especially when people can't put it in words. We have to help them find words, because otherwise they're going to find another way to do it. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Blair Davison, and I'm pleased to be here because this is a state that I love, and our state unfortunately has a horrific problem with suicide. So for well over 4 decades, Montana has either led the nation or been at the very top of the nation in terms of individuals who have completed suicide. And one of the things that's so horribly tragic about that is that it's such a loss of human capital. You know, I think the number 1 is very important because for each individual whose life ends by suicide, there's just this tremendous ripple effect, and it really does affect entire communities, whether it's something that is easily discussed or worse, not discussed. So that loss translates all sorts of ways, but for a state like Montana, where our human capital is so precious, it is disproportionately awful. And I think that while I can reel off all variety of statistics about suicide in Montana, one of the most important ones is that the majority, sometimes it alters a little bit by percentage points, firearms are used, and not just any firearms, but handguns are used. And this is not about gun control as it can be a very polarizing discussion. This is about that means do matter, and that access to means is a very important prevention method. And so, you know, the daughter of a World War II vet, I think that the Bill of Rights and the Constitution may be one of the best legal documents ever constructed and ways of guiding a nation. But this isn't about the Second Amendment, because I think people who are defenders of the Second Amendment are in large numbers also defenders of their family and their communities and human life. And so I think we have to really think hard about how we think about firearms in our state, because they are very much tied to how we identify as Montanans. And firearms can be safely stored, safely secured, but if they're not, they are an incredibly easily obtainable and lethal means. And I think if you talk to a lot of folks who have, which as a psychiatrist I do, who have either attempted suicide or thought about suicide, you know, in a different moment, that choice doesn't look good at all. And so making sure that means, lethal means in particular, are appropriately monitored and regulated is really important. And we could do a better job in this town, in this state, in this nation of controlling access to lethal means. And places where they do control things like access to Tylenol and access to firearms, they have decreased rates of suicide. It's just a fact. I think the other fact is that we don't get to choose the world we come into, and I came into a world where mental illness is somehow a specific designation of a certain set of problems. But in all my medical training, heads disconnected from bodies is not compatible with life. So it's really about health and wellness. It's not about mental health versus other kinds of health. It's about health and wellness. And so I think this move towards better integration. I'm very fortunate to get to be the staff psychiatrist at Curry, as well as working at Providence St. Patrick. So, I think the more we can integrate our ideas of health across a continuum, the better off we will be, particularly at destigmatizing things. Because these are hard conversations to have, but really, as a physician, you ask a lot of hard questions. You ask all kinds of variety of hard questions, and this one is maybe hard, but the more fluent you get at asking the question, the better you become at engaging individuals who are having serious struggles with depression, or sometimes not. Sometimes just having a serious struggle, and may just need someone else to help hear them out. So I think, as everyone has said, it's really a community-based effort. You don't have to be a board-certified psychiatrist to ask someone if they're thinking about ending their life. You do need the support of your community, though, and I think that's what's really heartening to see with all sorts of initiatives, and is that together we can be more powerful than we can be in silos, as Mike was mentioning. And just because I'm trained as a pediatrician and as a psychiatrist, I would say that particularly we need to start thinking about how we invest in our community from the get-go. So there is very good documentation that adverse childhood experiences place people at tremendous risk later in life for suicide. And so things like universal nurse visits to infants and families can be really important downstream. We live in a climate where people don't like to invest in things that they can't see immediate results, or that by the next legislature you can't say something helped. But we need to start taking a longer-term look at this and thinking across the lifespan about ways in which we can invest in one another so that we can start to really change what this looks like in our community and in our state. So I'll stop there, but thank you.
So what they said. Now you can all go home. So I'm Susan Hay Patrick, CEO of United Way of Missoula County and one of the founders of Project Tomorrow Montana, which is our suicide prevention initiative for our part of the country where you've already heard. We have a tremendous problem, and we've had for decades, with people taking their own lives. Before I talk about Project Tomorrow, though, the advantage of going last is that you can reflect on all the good things that have already been said. All of these people are involved in one way or another in Project Tomorrow, and we're really lucky to have their expertise, their experience, their heart, their passion, their good thinking heads on figuring out ways that we can prevent problems from happening in the first place. I completely agree with what you say. We're so good at helping people after they fall out of the boat, right after, or saying later, oh, I should have seen the signs, right? We're not good at prevention. We need to get a lot better, and preventing suicide is everybody's business, and we can all make it ours. But just starting with Jace, I'm so encouraged to hear about stepping up prevention efforts as part of law enforcement and really taking it seriously, and community policing. And you talked about the onion with the several layers, and really unpeeling the onion and getting to the heart of problems and starting the conversation. And how many of these people tonight talked about the importance of listening to someone's story. And then, of course, Kim, who's one of my heroes and ought to be everybody's hero, that the way that she found to cope was to try to prevent other families from going through this horrific, unimaginable pain of losing a child. And again, breaking the stigma of not talking about it. We are afraid that if we ask someone if they're thinking of taking their own lives, we're going to put the idea in their head. And the fact is, the idea is there. I heard Mike speak at our news conference when we launched Project Tomorrow, and you talked about when you're feeling suicidal, you're like in this tiny room with really high walls, this very dark room with really high walls, and you just want somebody to come in there. You just want somebody to come in that room with you. And we can all do that, right? QPR is the most widely formed taught of suicide prevention in the world. It's available to all of you, free. It's about a 90-minute training. It teaches you how to reach out a hand of help and hope. And there are other forms of suicide prevention training available, just like we take CPR, right? Hopefully we'll never have to use it. There's a much greater chance in Missoula, Montana, we'd have to use our QPR skills, given the prevalence of suicide. And Jack, you're so brave when you talk about your struggles and reaching out and listening and giving someone that message, hold on, you hold on, just for one more day, and being part of a community of helpers. And Blair, we cannot talk about suicide in Montana without talking about guns. And guns are a Montana way of life and a point of pride. It's part of being a Montanan. But we need to change how we think about firearms. We need to emphasize safe storage and to add prescription medication to that too. It's not just firearms. But we're not going to prevent everybody from killing themselves, maybe, but we'd like to get to functional zero, where if there's someone at risk in your home, that you lock up those guns, that you take a gun lock tonight, or that you consider getting removing firearms for the home, or getting a safe, and just that would be the normal thing, talking to your friends, your family, your children. If your child goes for a sleepover, asking, are there guns in the home and how are they stored? We have to start talking. We can't fix things we can't talk about. We've got to start talking about suicide. And so that we get, to that point where 0 is the only acceptable number. So I want to talk about Project Tomorrow, because it really is that community-wide collaboration that was missing on suicide. And so often we do operate from our silos, right? We do wonderful work, but we don't all sit at the same table and compare notes and figure out gaps in services, or how we can amplify our work and take it to the next level and leverage what we're all doing to even greater results. So about 3 years ago, alarmed by the growing number of suicides in our community, I just started having conversations with our then suicide prevention coordinator, Christy Scheel, at the health department. It was a quarter-time position, then it moved to a half-time position. And fortunately, recently, thanks to a lot of what we've done at Project Tomorrow, the Missoula City Council voted to make the suicide prevention coordinator, now Heidi Kendall, who is on vacation right now or would be here tonight, but voted to make that position full-time. We need a dozen Heidi Kendalls, but one full-time person is a heck of a lot better than the quarter-time person we had for years as are focused on suicide. So anyway, having conversations with the health department, with a woman who works for a for-profit company called Living Works, which is a Canadian-based company that works all over the world to make communities suicide safer, with folks at the University of Montana. And we sat down at a table one day at my office and just said, we need to do something. This is unacceptable. We need to get as many people as we can, the schools, the Missoula County Public Schools, the rural schools, the University of Montana, both hospitals, veterans organizations, the Chamber of Commerce, local business people, law enforcement, funeral directors, anybody with an interest in this issue. And our work group, we have a working group and a leadership team. So the leadership team are sort of CEO level decision makers, and then they deputize people within their organizations to serve as a working group that meets monthly. We've had to change locations 3 times because the group keeps growing so much. So what is the focus of Project Tomorrow? It is really to shine a light of help and hope on depression and suicide, to spread the message that suicide is preventable, it's never the only option, and we work through training, education, awareness, intervention, prevention, and recovery to spread this message. We work really hard to normalize getting help. In Montana, we're tough, we don't need to get help. But just like we come to our doctors when we have a sore throat, we need to normalize for people that when you're depressed and feeling suicidal, you reach out a hand of help. We need to talk, Mike said, it's so prevalent at the university, undiagnosed and the high incidence. We need to talk about our own stories because thoughts of suicide are normal. Most people in their lives have experienced bouts of depression or thought about suicide. Maybe just a passing thought like, well, one way to get out of this mess I'm in would be, if I weren't here. But many people, many of us, thoughts of suicide and depression are not abnormal. We need to tell our own story. Our mayor talks about his own bout with depression. I've told my own story that I've been seriously depressed to the point of, if I hadn't had the support of family and friends and colleagues, I would have contemplated taking my own life. I didn't see another way out. Unfortunately, had a support system that led me to be more resilient. So Project Tomorrow, we try really hard to drive traffic to sources of help in our community. The National Suicide Lifeline, for example, and the National Crisis Text Line. It will come as no surprise to you that teenagers might be more comfortable texting their feelings to a crisis text line. We've tested these lines. They respond really fast, really effectively. We know that we've increased traffic to those. We know, as Kim said, I think the number's now closer to 3,000 trained in QPR or other forms of suicide prevention. We want to find more ways to train trainers so that has that ripple effect, because when you're a QPR trainer, you're obligated to do a certain number of trainings a year, so we can, again, amplify that message throughout the community, that help is available, that suicide is never the only option, that getting help when you're depressed is normal, and just encourage all of you to join our efforts and to make preventing suicide your business as well. So thank you.
We're going to move into question and answer now. We've got the experts here in the room with us, and we're so lucky to have them all around the table. But I did want to remind you that we do have a couple of different types of gun locks there. You're welcome to take one. If you're interested in QPR training for yourself or your organization, please sign the sheet in the back. And with that, we'll go ahead and take questions. In the back.
Yes, and I was curious, what were the statistics on suicide in Missoula County last year when you spoke about them?
Well, I brought last year's because I had the unfortunate job of tallying them. Last year there were 36 completed suicides and 9 accidental overdoses in Missoula County. So there's good years and bad years, and it's just, Don't cuss. I have several rooms in my world that are very black and dark. And, you know, as I was putting together these statistics, I was wrestling with what to say tonight and what message to communicate to you, because we're kind of preaching to the choir. By virtue of the fact that you're here tonight, you obviously care, and so I commend you for being here, and I thank you. But these aren't just numbers. These are people. These are kids. These are adults. These are World War II veterans, Korean War veterans. These are college-age students from out of state. That human capital that was spoken of. And that's what we need to remember. The next time you're having that conversation in your head, asking yourself whether you should say something or not, you should. I give you permission. I cross-deputize it. I mean, if we don't, you know, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting a different result. And we've been getting the same result over and over and over for generation after generation after generation. And so we are in the process of doing a paradigm shift, and it's a whole lot like work. It's a whole lot like work. Ask these folks. And you know what? It's expensive. And you know what? Nobody really wants to talk English about this, but I'm not smart enough not to. It's a big onion. But we're in the process of peeling it back, and we have to continue because it's our future and it's our hope. And I think there's a lot of good work being done. I don't want to be all dark and gloomy, but I want to encourage you folks to get involved in some level. Did that answer it? I felt like I yelled at you. I'm sorry.
And if I can just piggyback onto what Jace just said. Ever since, I mean, this has obviously been an issue of importance to me for a long, long time. But ever since I got involved with QPR, I take it personally when I hear about or read about a suicide in this community. And what I want is that everyone in this community takes it personally. This is our failure as a community that somehow we didn't see this coming, somehow we didn't cut it off. And I hear that kind of passion in your voice. This is not acceptable, and we all need to take
I'll
ownership.
say this about training, and I can prove it to you scientifically. Cops, we're in high-stress situations, rapidly unfolding shootings. We make life-or-death decisions. They may have TV shows about us. We're so cool. But at the end of the day, it's a scientific fact that you react how you train. In the last couple of weeks, there was an officer-involved shooting in Boise, and a homicide suspect was actually shot and killed by law enforcement. During that incident, a big, huge, burly, tough man's man cop who used to be a football player for Boise State got shot. And you know what he did? He's in a gunfight, and he goes like this. Because that's what they taught him in football. If I'm tapping my helmet, coach, take me out, I'm injured, I'm injured.
Wow.
Can you spend 90 minutes just to get the door open? When somebody actually confides in you and says, when you ask how it's going, they say not so good. Just to ask a few key questions. You don't have to be some PhD or doctor. You just have to be a human that cares. We'll give you the basic foundation and a toolbox to draw from. It's not as hard as we make it out to be. And the hard part is that a lot of times what I found is that the good is the worst enemy of the best. In other words, you may be sitting out there tonight going, oh gosh, I could never do that. Boy, that cop talks for a living. He's pretty passionate. Boy, I could never do what he does. And you might be better at it than I am. You might have the skills and the life experience that you're sitting in the audience tonight and you are the best and I'm just good. But you'll never know if you don't get over yourself and take a little bit of risk. And I'm asking you to risk. We ask the kids in the school assembly, it's not cool. Blow your cool. Blow your cool and step out on a limb and say something. Somebody else answer a question.
Do we have another question right there?
It's not really a question, but I'd like to comment to Jack, and I believe you're the one that said, and you did too, Jace, take a risk and ask a question. And you said it to me tonight with the gentleman you have. I have a granddaughter who's alive today from last Thursday because a counselor was taught to ask them to make a commitment. And because my granddaughter had made a commitment to a counselor before she walked in the bathroom and was gonna cut her wrist, she said to a little 14-year-old friend something, and the friend has not said to me what it was or to her mother, but she ran to the counselor and she got the counselor before she did it. So take that risk. And if nothing else, ask them to make a commitment. Ask them for a commitment for the next day of commitment. I mean, it's the best thing you can do, and we can all do it.
Yeah, thank you so much, you guys, both of you. It often amazed me when a counselor would ask me to promise when I had told her I was thinking about suicide, that my depression was getting to that point. And often at the end of a session, she would say, "Do you promise that you will show up next week for your session?" And I can remember saying to her, I can very easily say that. That doesn't mean I'm going to be here. She said, "I know, but I want you to promise." I never broke one of those promises. I don't know why, because I broke plenty of promises to plenty of other people in my life. But when I had that direct, "Will you promise to be here next Tuesday?" I always showed up. Wasn't happy necessarily, but I showed up. Thank you.
So how does that work? I was in emergency rooms for a long time, and I had a lot of people talk about suicide contacts when the mental health professional would come in and talk to them, and I always thought they were deeper things. Just because it always seems to me like suicide is a personal event, a thought, process, situation, that I would tell you anything and do what I want. Just to get you off my back. So, I mean, I have to wonder, I mean, it obviously it works.
Yeah.
But I've never understood it, and
Yeah.
I've always wondered why that got to be such a big thing. I mean, it's across
Yeah.
the board.
Yeah. Do you want to weigh in on that as a professional?
Well, I think that a lot of what goes into good suicide prevention is about establishing relationships. And a lot of what transpires when people are contemplating suicide is feeling the desperation of isolation and being alone. And so I think that, you know, like anything, a contract for safety is going to be a better contract when there is more N of one, so more personal attention to that contract. So having a relationship with a counselor where you have made a promise to that individual, being connected to specifics. So the more specific a contract for safety can be, or a safety plan can be, the better it is. But we're talking about people who are in care, right? We have a horrible problem in this state and in this nation about access to care. And, you know, it takes a long time to make a pediatric psychiatrist, and it's not a glamorous or particularly desirable specialty for those who are starting in medicine. So, you know, we're not going to churn out more of me anytime soon to address the great need. So we have to think about new ways for people to access care. And build relationships. And so it doesn't need to be a psychiatrist. It doesn't need to be a psychologist. I mean, in some counties in this state, there are neither. And they're neither in the next county. So it's really about individuals becoming that relationship and that bind. But I think the other reason that sometimes people don't ask is because they don't know what to do when someone says, yes, I am thinking of killing myself. And And that's where I think things like QPR can be so good. I think that's where, you know, making a commitment that you will be with that individual, because if they have disclosed the thoughts about suicide, there needs to be a plan in place. And access to care is a hard thing in this state and in this nation. So
I'd like to say one more thing. Whatever you guys are doing is working, because this was not just one friend that went to the counselor. Once the counselor got her out and called me first, because I was a contact person, and then got my daughter, who's a hospice nurse, that counselor, along with the superintendent and principal of the school, would not allow my granddaughter to leave until she had listed 5 people she thought she could talk to, until my daughter could say that she would be with an adult for at least the next week. After she left, she asked my daughter for the name of the first person on her list, and it was my daughter-in-law in Spokane. That counselor called my daughter-in-law, and my daughter-in-law was on the road and spent the weekend with my granddaughter. So whatever you're doing is working. I mean, if you're putting things in place at the schools, but we have to be there, each one of us. I mean, it could happen in my place of business, it could happen anywhere. And that follow-through is what's made, at least with my granddaughter, made a huge difference, a huge difference.
It comes back to that communication piece, like he said, and the reason that I think, what I hear in that is why that silly contract and that promise means so much, is the person in that situation, just like he said, is trying to communicate, and by you willing to establish that contract, you've just allowed them a voice. You've just given them an opportunity. And what I found in death notifications as well, and people who are in crisis mode or experiencing trauma have just ruined their world, a lot of times I follow that up, that contract, with a business card and that appointment card and something physical and tangible to hold on to that they can wrap their mind around after the fact. The other thing is, what do we say if they say yes? Well, you don't have to say anything. You know, as Kim stated so much, words suck. They're inadequate a lot of times. They want to be listened. Well, let's develop that thought. You don't have to give me answers. Okay. Well, let's just build on the foundation that you've let the cat out of the bag. So how often? Have you thought of a method? If you got them talking and they're wanting to communicate, keep the dialogue going as long as possible. It's information you can glean that may come in useful later. But right now, it's the stopgap measure. And it's a journey that these folks are on. And that's one of the things that's so frustrating about this onion, is that we, like we spoke about, in all of our fields, money is tight. And we need quantifiable results. And unless we come together as a community, what's awesome as you're talking about your story is the levels and layers of community and relationship rallying around a young girl in crisis. That's just community. You know what? Montanans do that. We are fiercely independent people, and we don't like asking for help, and we don't want the government intervening, and we're gun-toting, redneck, hillbilly, backwoods, right? I'm one. I was born and raised here to a certain degree. So if we can tap into that idea of helping our own, of taking care of each other, if we can establish that community first, and we establish that relationship, then we can have the non-confrontational. Guess what? You need to lock your guns up. You just do. I can tell you a story of a 16-year-old who, had the gun been locked up, he would probably still be alive. He wasn't even smart enough to know how to use it. And I had to take his cold, dead hand and get the blood off his index finger to open up his phone to see that he had Googled how to load and fire a hunting rifle that he used to end his life. And that's gory and graphic, but that's the reality of it. And we could do better than we are. And I'm a gun-toting, redneck Montana cop, and I'm a Second Amendment guy, and I really appreciate your viewpoint. But the key to that whole addressing that issue is building a relationship of trust first. And be prepared for the complaints. Be prepared for the people to gripe and complain and the backlash. That's fine. You can argue and complain all you want. Guess what? Now we're in a dialogue.
Yeah.
Tricked you. Baby steps, right? I didn't remember how to play my video, size 13 hat. So we got to finish on something, but I don't know. Is there any other question?
I do think that the hardest piece of QPR is the referral, because oftentimes that person is living in chaos and desperation, and they're impulsive and they need help now. They don't need help 2 weeks from now when they can get an appointment with their primary care person if they're lucky, or get some kind of referral to mental health. I feel like that support maybe isn't recognized or shared enough to know where to turn at that moment when you're trying to do QPR yourself with someone who's financially desperate and they can't afford to go to the doctor and they're afraid to go to the ER because of the hospital bills and so on. It's really hard to know exactly how to refer. And I wondered if you could speak just a little bit to that piece.
I'm looking at Kim, but.
I can speak to it. They need to take them to the ER. And here's the deal. The ER is overwhelmed and they're frustrated. But the mechanism is placed is that you start at the emergency room of any hospital, and from there they can do a voluntary committal, a voluntary referral, which actually we utilize quite a bit with people in crisis because we want to empower them to have some control. And then from there, they can get a basic mental health evaluation. Sometimes that's process is delayed because if they have any alcohol or drugs on board, they're not going to evaluate them until they're sober and able to be. And quite honestly, our ER folks are a little bit overwhelmed. You know, St. Patrick Hospital revamped their whole ER and have more beds than anybody, and they're full all the time. And people are tired and they're tapped out. But that's the mechanism that's in place right now. And you know what? I can get you to the ER. I can take you there. We can give you a little bit. And you know, I get it may be a few hours. It may be. But there's that commitment piece on our part to stay with them, to be with them, to let them know. And I think that's even less intimidating going to the ER because you would go there, just like you said, if I fell on my and cut myself or put my hand through a window, I'd go get stitches. And so it's less, there's not as much a stigma associated with it. And when you go there, people don't know why you're there necessarily. The problem is that it is a limited resource with our two hospitals and the folks that do those initial evals. But from there, that can lay at least a foundation.
As part of our plan for Project Tomorrow, we are looking for, more funding for voluntary after-hours crisis stabilization because, people don't necessarily need to go to or want to get into the system, go to ER, go to Providence, but so not just the crisis stabilization housing for these emergencies, but also more follow-up for attempt survivors after they leave, because it doesn't mean that they're out of danger. It just means that they're out of danger for now. So we're creating a subcommittee of direct service providers to talk about both those things for our community.
Yeah, I would just echo, safety first. So the critical thing when someone is acutely suicidal is that they not be left alone. I think another part of Montana's culture, not the fishing, but the drinking, is problematic. So unfortunately, when you really drill down in the numbers, two things kind of emerge in our state, but also in our nation, is oftentimes individuals who have completed suicide, have substances on board, or have issues with chronic pain. So we have a national epidemic related to chronic pain and treatment of chronic pain, and but the trifecta of firearms, alcohol, and prescription medications is just overwhelmingly dangerous and lethal. And so I think, thinking about that safety first, that you don't want to allow someone who is acutely suicidal to be alone. And the ER is the point of entry. And I would say, I'm a big fan of the Bill of Rights and the rest of the amendments to the Constitution, including giving women the right to vote. So I think not only do you want to support your community, but you want to think about what you want your community to look like in terms of where we want our funding dollars to go. Locally and nationally. And I would just say, when we think about prevention, I mean, we are the country that brought the world the weekend. We can do amazing, things.
Just to build on what you talked about alcohol, and alcohol is present in a great many suicides in Montana. What we know about suicide, it's a very impulsive act. There can be just minutes between the time someone makes that decision and the time they take their own life. So it really does point to the importance of gun locks, safe storage. But I agree, building that relationship, but there's such a correlation between impulsivity and suicide. And if you have a gun or prescription drugs right there, you're desperate, you're going to use them.
I've heard several comments from the panelists tonight about not knowing what to say if someone tells you that they're suicidal. And I'd like to tell you just a brief story that worked for me. About 15 years ago, my son was suicidal. He came to me and said, I think I'm going to end my life. What we said to him and seemed to work was, you can always do it later. If you do it now, you have foreclosed all options. You can do it later to try to get him through that period. 15 years later, today, he has adopted a family from the Ukraine. He works 80 hours per week in order to support that family in Ukraine. He just ordered 2 tons of coal for them. So the part of the story that's important is you need to make that person understand that his life can be different, his life can change, and his life is valuable. Another thing that I've learned, a way to approach it when you hear someone say that they are suicidal, is you look them right in the eye and you say, I do not want you to do that. And as Jack knows, I did that yesterday, my tenant. He owes me $7,000 rent. I don't care about that. Seriously.
Yeah.
When he told me he was suicidal, my wife and I jumped in the car. We spent several hours with him yesterday. And relative to the idea about a contract and how do you get a contract to work, and I think several of you commented, you have to establish a relationship with them. One of the things we did yesterday afternoon was we started talking about music, and the music that he enjoys.
Yeah.
And he mentioned a group, and it's a much younger group than I would recognize the name, but
Kids and their music, who knows?
but anyway, he said, oh yes, they're coming to Missoula. They're going to be here on the 15th of November. Before we left, I shook his hand and I said, you promised me now that you're not going to do anything until 15th of November. Remember that concert? So that gives...
Just a reason to live
so
another
what
day.
say about establishing a relationship in order to have a contract that's effective. So those are some things that work for me.
Best landlord in Missoula. I gotta tell you. And I never met him before.
It's hard work.
The last prolonged and serious suicidal depression I went through, what kept me going for about 3 months, and this will sound absolutely laughable, was that the Grizz were having a particularly good season, and I wasn't going to die until I found out if they would win the national championship. And it's absolutely ridiculous, and I knew at the time how stupid this was. It's like, do I want to die or do I not want to die? But somehow, it's like, well, yeah, but I can do it later. I can do it after the season's over. Of course, they didn't win, but anyway.
But you're still here, Tara.
And I'm still here.
You know, you can't be afraid to talk to be real friendly with parents too, because that's what I do all day now, is talk to parents on the cell phone. And I've had a couple of instances where they're like, well, you know, we have some behavioral problems. What kind of behavioral problems are those? You know, you gotta sit up and well, you know, last week he threatened to kill his siblings. Yes, you have my attention. You know, but they're still just, they kind of know something's wrong, but they're not so sure they want to do anything about it, because that's a big step to take, you know, because you kind of, I don't know, broken your kids' trust, you know, whatever's going on in their heads, the neighbors might find out, I don't know. Surely little so-and-so wouldn't do that. You know, so I spend a lot of time, and I think that the community needs to realize too that you have to be willing to talk to your peers about their children, you know, because they don't want to think that.
Yeah.
One of the hardest groups to get to come to training is parents. And the schools have tried to do it. It's really difficult. And I know that parents work all day long, and then they're involved in going to watch their kids and doing all this stuff. But there's a booklet called Parents as Partners that goes over the warning signs and clues to be watchful of and what to do. I wish I could get that booklet in every parent's hands that has a kid in school. But it's, you know, everywhere that we do a QPR presentation, we ask if you have any ideas on how to bring parents in to hear this. Let us know. We're open to anything.
I can attest to that. I have a daughter who does not want to admit this happened. And I invited her here tonight. I've invited her to go to church with me. And her words to me was, your granddaughter doesn't want you to talk about God. And, you know, she does not want you to talk about the fact that she tried suicide. And I realized it wasn't my granddaughter that said that. It was my daughter. Yeah.
Brandy,
You just gotta keep doing it.
Yes.
I just, first of all, I have the privilege of working in prevention, and so thank you so much for talking about prescription drugs, because I think if, in my opinion, that it's about talking about the means, and I really do agree with Jace. I just appreciate the way that you talk about firearms, because it's not about the firearm itself, and it's not about the prescription medication, which medication does have a great purpose until it's not used properly. I don't know, guns have a great purpose or not, but it's about them not being used properly. So I just really appreciated the way you unpack that. And then secondly, just having the privilege of listening to you all so often, one thing that I can't stop thinking about from, I think, one of the first Project Tomorrow meetings I've ever went to, and so I just want to share it as a parent, is that I really honor the connection between depression and suicide. But for kids, that isn't always the connection. It is a 10 to 12 minute decision because their girlfriend broke up with them. You all can say it better, but because they got an F on a test and they're afraid you're going to be mad at them, they miss curfew. And I always just get anxious when we don't have the opportunity to talk about that for a second, because I think, again, honoring so much that depression should always be talked about with suicide. But I do know that in this state, we're seeing an increase in kids that just don't have basic coping skills, and it's kids that none of us would think of as those kids because they don't know what failure is. And that scares me a lot as a parent. Not that my kids certainly couldn't have depression or all of those things, but just, you know, I don't know, I'm not saying it right, but just mentioning that, and I don't know how you guys would address that, but it just always scares me to kind of not forget that piece. There's so much to talk about, but that for some kids it isn't about mental illness. It's about a mental state of mind at that moment, and they make, like you said, they make that decision so quickly. And if we always tie it to, I agree with you, it should just be health in general, but if we always tie it to health, I think then sometimes it's even harder to miss something that's going on with our child.
And that's why means really matter, because you can't kill yourself if you don't have something you can kill yourself with. And as I mentioned earlier, in places where they have been more committed to addressing the facts of how people are killing themselves, they move the dial. Australia has been excellent. Places in Europe have been excellent. Places in Asia have been excellent. And these are not places where people are, where communities are devoid of individual freedoms. They're just simple things that can be done when there is the will to do it. So.
In the last few months alone, NAMI Missoula has been contacted, first of all, by a group of students from the University of South Dakota who came here back in January on a project that they had chosen the issue of suicide to do some research on. Where did they decide after Googling it and all that? They decided to come to Missoula, Montana. We have been contacted, I think Heidi Kendall at the Health Department was contacted recently by a British journalist who's putting together a show for the BBC about suicide in America. Where is he coming? He's coming to Missoula, Montana. We need to get people coming here to find out how we move the needle in the right direction. I don't want people to keep coming here because we're sort of the patient zero of suicide. We need to turn it around the way other places have done.
And just if it's any comfort, I talked to him too, and one reason he wants to come to Missoula is because he sees a community-wide effort to address it.
Good.
Kim, does the training that you do, is that ever done in high schools? High schools?
We do it with the faculty, but when we go into the high schools, we do a program called SOS, Signs of Suicide. And that's where we talk to the students about what are the warning signs and clues that you might see? What things have you observed from your friends and that? What do you do if a friend indicates that they're going to kill themselves and they want you to keep a secret? You never keep a secret. We drill that into them left and right. And that they need to tell a trusted adult. We talk to them about who would they consider to be a trusted adult. And then what if you go to that trusted adult and they don't believe you? What do you do then? You find another trusted adult. And it's been really interesting. Some of the stories that come out are just, you can't imagine. And the kids are very open about talking about things. It's made differences.
The kids are open enough for that? Would the kids be open enough to invite their parents to come?
It's part of the assembly program that we're doing, the Say Something. It's designed to have, when we did it at Cedar Lake, it's an afternoon assembly with the whole school, and then they invite the parents and the community to come back for a session that night. And part of the night for the parents is showing a video of their kids' response of how they responded to what they learned in their assembly, and it's a pretty powerful deal. Cedar Lake's a close-knit community, and we've seen some good results, if nothing else, just about making that connection. But we can't really, this onion just keeps getting bigger because part of this is the breakdown of the family, and we've talked about parenting, and we're trying to overcome the us against them mentality a lot of times. Parents against law enforcement, parents having unrealistic ideas of what I can and can't do as an officer, parents having unrealistic ideas about what the teachers do. Look, I send my kids to schools for you to do this, And there's animosity between parents and teachers. There's animosity with blended families. When a kid is in crisis, it's still all about, oh, stepdad did this or stepmom, and there's a battle there. So that's another whole layer and another whole evening session. But it's complex. And we have to start with these baby foundation steps. And I think we're there. I think we're starting to take a few steps, and we want to see some momentum build. But it's changing a culture. It's changing a mindset. There's a lot of, Brandy touched on it. Are we equipping these kids to deal with loss and deal with disappointment? Are we
building resilience?
Yeah, building resilience in them and giving them, part of the fundamental breakdown of the family and divorce, ripping things apart. There's a whole bunch of trauma, and a lot of the ACEs comes as fruit of that. And so that's a side to this. It's pretty it's pretty big. But
Did you say that the male from middle-aged are the highest suicide rate in the county?
Yeah.
Yep.
So what?
statistically
Well, in
speaking,
the nation.
In the nation.
In the nation.
Okay, in the nation, not in Missoula.
35
Well,
to
no,
like 64.
Missoula reflects the nation.
So I was just wondering how you reach them. How do you reach these middle-aged men? Because they're not in school, they're not, I don't know. They're working around other men, that might be a problem.
Yeah, try to reach them through the workplace, try to reach them through social media, bus signs. I mean, nothing that a little money can't help you.
Did you say bus signs?
Bus signs on the side, inside the buses.
yeah.
I think now every Missoula
I,
city bus has a Project Tomorrow sign, but a lot through social media. If you haven't ever Googled the mantherapy.com, I would encourage you to look at man therapy.
Do men look at that or just the women?
Yeah, that I don't know. That I don't know.
You can lead a
But
man to therapy.
it is a
but
hard,
you
it's a more difficult demographic to reach. We've talked about training bartenders in QPR.
Yeah.
I've been planted the seed, and I don't know how to make it come to pass, but we need the Jumbotron. Because that
Yeah.
demographic goes to the Grizz games and they hold season
Yep.
tickets. And if you could do a 30-second blurb and reach 23,000 people in our community to break the ice, to get the
Yeah.
conversation
Yeah.
started,
Yeah.
just before halftime, not during
Yeah.
tailgate time, not when, there's options out there. I think the workplace will be key, and then that positive peer thing.
What if
And
there was hunting clubs? So these guys, they get together and they build connections around hunting, and then they can talk about, I guess. You're talking about men like women? That's not. Well, I know a lot of men that go hunting together, so that.
Yeah,
that's-
we have been welcome at Cabela's to table. We've gone to one gun show and had a very positive response because we were very careful about how we messaged. But it's a difficult, so much of our prevention efforts as a society have been geared toward kids because of that terrible, tragedy when that happens. But the demographic that we're trying to reach, it's a lot harder.
And, what I would like to imagine is we as a country have done an amazing job of talking about cancer in ways that, 50 years ago you didn't talk about cancer. And October, you can't go to an athletic event without being this, the pink jersey brigade. And that's wonderful. And I don't mean to, I'm not in any way trying to take away from that initiative, but we are losing more people in terms of rate of death to suicide than we are losing to cancer. And so, thinking about what would it look like if Grizzly Stadium were not pink but were orange, or it would, that's how you start to move the dial as a collective consciousness. So.
And we have leafleted at Grizz games with it, Keep Our Grizz Family Safe, from Carl Rawson, who's our statewide suicide prevention coordinator. It's an interesting reception. Some people are like, no, I don't want that. But so many people said, my brother, my son, my wife. I mean, it was a receptive audience. I know we have to close, but if you're interested, please like us on Facebook, Project Tomorrow Montana, because we post every day information, articles. We do keep it messages of hope and help that I hope you would find empowering. We have a website, projecttomorrowmt.org, that lists not only local resources but national resources, sort of current literature, and it's just a way to hopefully feel a little more empowered.
This is definitely an ongoing dialogue, and the conversation hasn't ended. We have some materials. Please feel free to take them with you. And now you know some points of contact of who's doing the work in our community, and maybe you can be thinking too how we can support them and how as a member of our organizations and our social circles, we can support his effort to have suicide awareness and prevention be a #1 priority in Missoula, Montana. Thank you all for coming.